They want you to think that the addition of black characters is groundbreaking, new, and necessary cultural reform. They also want you to think that if you complain about this, you must be a bigot of some kind. But the very idea that they are bringing social political ideas, and worse, social engineering ideas, into a fantasy work is pretty offensive already. But that they would do that to a Tolkien-based fantasy is outright appalling. And in case you don't know, Tolkien was very explicit about not liking allegory, not liking direct political or even religious references. And so to take his work that he made to not be like that and turn it into a vehicle for that sort of thing is just straight up offensive. But if we put aside the political messaging nonsense for a moment, and if we ignore the part where Middle-earth was crafted to be a European prehistory mythology thing, let's ignore all that for just a minute. From a pure fantasy and world-building point of view, could black elves and hobbits been cool? Well, maybe it could have been, but what Amazon is doing is still failing, and here's why. Because from a pure world-building point of view, especially when you're doing a kind of an expansive historical kind of style mythology, where you have histories and you have peoples and all these nations and races all interacting and all. When you're doing a mythology or a fantasy of that scale, you have to do a little bit of actual world building, an explanation of peoples and nations and how they interact. And that's what they really didn't do. They kind of just randomly race swapped things. Allow me to explain. In case you forgot how biology works, when people on a large scale they intermarry and have children, those children will tend to look like their parents. And when their parents are from different cultures or different races or different skin colors, whatever the case may be, the children will tend to start to be a blend of that. So over time, people within a culture will start to look like people from that culture. Kind of how it works. What we see in our modern world, where you have people of every cultural background and every place of the earth, all mixed around, that's because we started out as divided peoples in different, even without politics involved at all, just geographically isolated regions. Okay, people from one region looked like people from that region. People from another region looked like people from that region. And then as technology and transportation and civilization all advanced, people start moving around. So now anywhere you go on Earth in our real world, you can potentially find people of any race and color and background. But that's a recent cultural phenomenon that's happened within the last, say, 100 years or so. And so that kind of large scale transportation and moving around, that's a new thing. And hey, that's an interesting phenomenon. If you want to make a fantasy world that reflects that, fine. But that's not what Lord of the Rings was. And more importantly, Rings of Power is claiming to do something that's in the ancient past, far before Lord of the Rings. And see, the farther back you go, you're more likely to find more racial isolation. Because, again, as cultures move forward, they integrate and intermarry and they blend. So to go backwards in time and find more cultural diversity is kind of weird. But even beyond that, just look at Numenor. Numenor is one of the main nations in Lord of the Rings history. Is where Aragorn and the entire race of Gondor comes from. Okay, and again, as originally written, they were a European prehistory, so they were described as being Caucasian, whatever, fine. But even again, within the context of Middle Earth, ignoring the real world references, they are an island nation. Numenor is an island nation. The people of Numenor left Middle Earth. They went out to sea, and literally the gods, provided them an island to settle on. So they are closer to the land of the gods, but they're humans, so they're not allowed to go all the way there. So you had these humans, and this is like special place prepared for them by the gods, and it's an island nation for that specific culture because that people of that culture, they fought against evil. They were given a special place. So as an island nation, again, regardless of what color you want to make them, if you wanted to race swap the entire nation and say the Numenorians are actually black, okay, well, again, outside of context of real world stuff, fine. change the skin color of the Numenorians whatever color you want, black, white, pink, turquoise, green. They are an island nation of a specific culture that settled on that island. You see where I'm going here with this? Everyone on the island, whatever color they are, they should be that color. If you're going to randomly race swap some people in there, and not just anybody, but race swap in a queen, okay, so you're implying that not only are there people of other color on this island, but you're implying that people of great importance of other color on this island, the king's marrying people of other colors. So how can Numenor be a multicultural place if it's an island nation that's been living, it started out as a singular culture and moved to this island, hundreds of years ago, and what's going on here? Now, if they want to do the world building and explain why there's multiple different tribes of Numenorians who not only are separate racial backgrounds, but have remained racially isolated long enough, such that there are white Numenorians and black Numenorians, and that they've only recently started intermarrying more often, so that there can be a black queen marrying a black king, then at least you could try to explain it. If you have to do a lot of world building to actually explain why there's racial differences on Numenor. Best we can tell, though, Rings of Power has not done that. And how can I know they have not done that? Because in all their desperate attempts to get fans to like them, they haven't mentioned any of it. They talk about directly wanting Middle-earth to reflect our world, but they don't offer any attempt they've made to explain why Middle-earth would look like our world. They just randomly race swap people in, which is total tokenization, not Tolkien, that's tokenizing them. And then just expect we're supposed to just accept that, and then, you must be a racist if you don't like it. Well, the people who like Middle-earth, especially people who know about the history of Middle-earth, know about the Second Age, and all this, people who know all about this stuff, those aren't just nerds who just like weird fantasy stuff, okay? Those are people who spent some time reading and learning this stuff, who are fascinated with the fantasy world building. And so if you're going to change that fantasy world and have no interest in world building, then you've just failed as a fantasy nerd, okay? So obviously the Rings of Power cast has no interest in Lord of the Rings or in fantasy world building. They're not the type of people who've read this stuff. Nothing they've said publicly suggests that they are. And the showrunners who keep trying to pretend like they're big fantasy nerds and Tolkien fans, well, they have not demonstrated that they are Tolkien fans at all, nor have they demonstrated that they're even fantasy fans, okay? These guys, they're no interest in world building. No interest in anything other than just making shit up. Point is, just from a fantasy world building point of view, could you have found a way to have black hobbits, black dwarves, or whatever you want in Lord of the Rings? You probably could have found a way to at least pretend like you're trying. But they're not. They haven't tried. Now, I talk about Numenor, but let's go ahead. Let's talk about the others here, okay? The dwarves are a similar situation. They are, by design, a very closed community. They don't like other people. So they don't integrate with other races. And they are somewhat of a minority in Middle-earth. Dwarves have never been a majority population. They don't have giant nations like the elves have had, or like the humans have had, or anyone really. They are more known and numerous than the hobbits, but they've kind of kept to themselves, and they're mostly underground places. Now, there's a biological point I've heard some people bring up, that people who live mostly out of the sun are more likely to be pale-skinned than dark-skinned, but that's another little biological note. But from just a genealogical point of view, the dwarves are not a multicultural style community. Not in general. Again, if you want to just say that there are other tribes of dwarves, and some tribes are dark-skinned, okay, fine. But you'd have to actually explain that, and then explain why those tribes of dwarves have gone without integrating with each other for so long, that they are, in fact, genetically different looking from each other, and why they have only just now started integrating. Because once again, the way they randomly race swapped it is there's a black queen. Again, it's always got to be a queen. A black queen marrying a white dwarf king. Like, okay, cool. Why there's separate dwarven clans that have only just now started intermarrying? Did I then do any world building on that? Any explanation about that? Any attempt to connect that to Middle Earth, or are you just randomly race swapping people again? See? If you make no attempt at world building, then you can't pretend like you're... You just keep making the political agenda obvious. This is not just... Our world looks the way it does for reasons. And ancient mythological worlds look the way they look for reasons. If you want to make a world that looks like our world, fine, but you're making a different world. If you just take random elements of that fantasy world and just randomly change it to look like our world, then you're just failing at world building. You're making a less meaningful, you're making a less immersive fantasy. And the more you just break immersion just for the sake of political virtue signaling, the more you dilute the entire story in the first place. And then to try to say that people who don't like this are just, oh, they just must be bigots, that's just an ignorant thing to say. Clearly you're ignorant of fantasy, and clearly they're ignorant of Middle-earth, and just ignorant of writing in general. This is not a thing it's not a thing they're into. They just got paid, they had $1 billion budget, so they get to do whatever they want, then with no, well, you heard they fired Tom Shippey. They fired the actual Tolkien expert, because they didn't want that. They didn't want any actual immersive world building here. They just wanted their own random thing, and they wanted to slap the Lord of the Rings label on it for just branding purposes. But okay, so go down the list. Okay, so the Black Hobbits, we have the same problem. They randomly race swap some hobbits. They try to say that, well, they're Harfoots, and first of all, failing to know the difference between Harfoots and hobbits when the book this is not some sort of obscure writings of Tolkien. Right there in the Lord of the Rings books, it says that Harfoots are a tribe of hobbits. Hobbits had 3 basic tribes, one of which was called Harfoots. And to say that a Harfoot story is not a Hobbit story, that's as ignorant and just... That's like saying that, an African story is not a human story. Okay, that would be a terribly racist and just horrible thing to say, but that's what they're saying when they say that Harfoots are not hobbits, because they're just stupid. Or, well, no, I don't really think they're that stupid. I think they think that we are that stupid. That's what it is. But, okay, so fine. You want to say that Harfoots are a black tribe of hobbits. And, well, actually, if they said that Harfoots are a black tribe of hobbits, that would make more sense than what they are actually doing. Because, one, they're trying to say that Harfoots are some sort of, ancient proto-hobbit. So how do ancient proto-hobbits evolve into a separate skin color? I don't know. But if you said that they were just a separate tribe, and this tribe happens to be dark-skinned, okay, that at least would be trying to make sense. But then they don't even do that. Because they have one black hobbit, and then the other hobbits are some other nationality. So once again, I have this problem of how does this singular little tribe of people have multiple colors in them? Are they actual multiple tribes that have all recently come together and haven't interbred very much yet? Or are they some sort of tribe that just magically changes skin color regardless of what their parents are? I mean, that would be an interesting fantasy element. That would have no correlation to modern things, and so it wouldn't work for their political virtue signaling, but, I mean, who knows what they're trying to do. The point is, what they're not trying to do, they're not trying to do very effective immersive world building. Alright, but this brings me to the elf guy. What's his name, Arendelle, or whatever his name is, the character. So, Black Elf. Same thing as the others, okay? They've done no real explanation of why this elfin tribe is different. I think they've made some attempt. They call him a Sylvan Elf. Again, ignoring what Tolkien wrote about Sylvan Elves, and they're saying, okay, so he's got dark skin, fine. So let's pretend, give the benefit of the doubt, let's just say that, fine. We're going to pretend Sylvan Elves are dark skin, and that we're not worried about, explaining that. Fine. We have a tribe of dark-skinned elves. Okay, is there a problem with that? Why can't we just say, okay, fine, there's a dark-skinned elf, let's be cool with it? Well, what does elf even mean? Allegedly, this actor, in his interviews, he talked about how, he has always wanted to be an elf, but it just bothered him that elves were white. He couldn't relate to this elven fantasy, or he wanted to, but just couldn't. He had no hope of participating in that fantasy because elves were white. Well, you know what elves also are? They're also immortal. They have a super strength, super agility. They're supernatural beauty and wisdom, and they are cosmic millennia-long battle against evil. So he can relate to all those things about elves. Though he likes all that part about elves, but their skin color, and that ruins it for him. So, what? Really, dude? And then he brings in things like, he wants to... Apparently he feels like Native Americans are somehow the best examples of elves he can think of. And then martial arts style he wanted to incorporate into the character. It was some from, like, Indonesia, Africa thing, or I forget what it was called. But the point is, some sort of culturally specific martial arts style. And then Native Americans and... of course, the buzz cut. He got this whole buzz cut haircut thing, because now the Sylvan Elves are also have barber tools to do a buzz cut here. So he's specifically integrating multiple different cultural images into this character. So he likes all the supernatural elements of elves. He hates all the cultural correlations of elves. What does the word elf even mean to him? Just a pointy-haired action hero? I mean, if that's what he wants, then great. He gets to be a pointy-haired action hero. But why did you have to do that in a Tolkien movie? If you're doing a story based on Tolkien's elves, why don't you do a story about Tolkien's elves? If you're crafting your own version of elves, well, why did you do it in your own show? Because in case you didn't realize this, in case you didn't know, now, again, allegedly this actor he always liked the idea of being an elf, but I don't believe him. I think he's just lying out his ass. Because anyone who's into elves as a fantasy trope would know that Tolkien did not copyright elves, okay? He didn't have the copyright claim on that. Elves are everywhere. They're in fiction everywhere. They're very popular, especially in modern times. They're in video games, they're in comic books. They're a very common thing. Anyone that goes into fantasy is bound to encounter elves of some kind. And yeah, stereotypically they're pale-skinned, because most of them are inspired by Tolkien's elves. But you'll find elves of all sorts of colors everywhere. There's blue elves, there's red elves, there's, green elves. And there's quite famously dark elves in some of the fiction from the Dungeons & Dragons literature. And the famous, how do you pronounce his name? Drizzt? That famous dark elf there who has all sorts of books written about him. Books that delve into the racial complications of, race relations and races that have been stigmatized. And all this territory has already been covered in fantasy. It's just Tolkien's elves are part of his stories, which are also written as a kind of a prehistory mythology for the English, so that's why he wrote him as pale-skinned. But somehow, Tolkien's little version of elves is offensive, and all the other versions of elves that have been everywhere are ignored. And the Rings of Power cast should all be exalted as famous, groundbreaking, champions of social justice, because just for being black and being in a Tolkien film. None of it holds up, none of it makes sense. And this guy, I don't think he even knows or cares what an elf even is. He just wants to be famous. And hey, can't fault him there. Who wouldn't want to be a cool action hero in a high-scale, action show? But to act like this is some sort of necessary, champion of justice, because he's, they're randomly tokenizing and race-swapping people in a Middle-earth story. Sorry, dude. You're just showing that you're ignorant. They don't know anything about Middle-earth. They don't care anything about Middle-earth. They don't care anything about Tolkien or any of these works. They don't even know the genre. Okay, they don't even know the genre. They could have just given this whole show a different title. For the amount of money they poured into this, they did not need to use the name Lord of the Rings. They could have left Tolkien out. They could have left Lord of the Rings out. They could have spent that $1 billion, $1 billion freaking dollars. This Being a Herald is the most expensive show ever made. They could have saved themselves a lot of money by not buying the rights to Tolkien, just hiring a couple good writers. Hire a couple of decent writers and make their own high-scale, high-budget fantasy film. Fill it with all the whatever messages they want, and they could do it without apology and without controversy, and everyone would love it because people love a good fantasy film. But you know why they didn't do that? Well, I guess it's because they just can't do it. They can't write it. It's either they completely are lacking the imagination to even find somebody that they could pay to write a good story for them, For all that money in the world, and they couldn't find any good writers? Either they're so just devoid of imagination, they can't comprehend how to do that, or that wasn't the point in the first place. Or their point in the first place was to take Tolkien's work and intentionally change it. And Tolkien went out of his way to be as gracious and respectful as possible to everybody. He took religion and politics out of his work. Yes, there's religious, themes, and there's these universal concepts that you can find in his story. He used, these applicable concepts, but he removed any intentional allegory so that it would be more universal to everybody. And to intentionally take his work and shove as much political stuff in there as you can, as if there's something offensive and egregious about his work, like his work was offending you. His work that was already world famous across nations, across generations for over nearly 100 years. And to take that work and basically declare, oh, this work is racist, until we come in here and we don't even understand how it works. We don't understand how to even write fantasy, but we're going to come in here, we're going to change a bunch of things up and act like we're improving it, like we're some sort of champions of justice. That's just nonsense. So either these people are totally ignorant or totally insidious. It's one or the other. They're completely ignorant fools of no creativity, or they're intentionally trying to dismantle Tolkien's legacy. One or the other, take your pick. But nobody, no smart and savvy person who's trying to make a good show would do what they are doing. So that's why, sure, if they had tried to make it happen, if they tried to convince us that you could have black elves, black hobbits, black dwarves, even black Númenóreans, maybe it could have been done. It could have been cool if they had even tried to make it cool. All these, all these peripheral offenses could have been looked past. At least, fine, whatever, do things your way. But they're not even trying to be cool with it. They're not even trying to make a legitimate story. They're trying to make us accept it as a legitimate story, but they're doing none of the actual work for it. So, are they just idiots? Don't know how to write good fantasy? Or do they have some sort of ideological axe to grind against Tolkien and his works? I don't know. Let me know what you think. Just like, share, and subscribe, and give me your opinions in the comments. So, see you next time.